The title of the talk is Revolution in Ringsend, 1919 to 1921, and generally this talk is going to be an overview of the Third Battalion area, but I need to go back a little bit because you can't just start the story of the revolution in 1919, certainly when it comes to the Third Battalion. When it comes to the Irish Revolution in Dublin, the stories tend to be dominated by the actions of the 2nd Battalion predominantly, or the squad who carried out the assassinations. But all the Dublin battalions right across the city, they all were very, very active, and that can certainly be said of the 3rd Battalion. So just to kick off, right, we're going to start right at the beginning and go back to 1909 with Na Fianna Éireann, whose earliest members were lads from Pearse Street, Ringsend, all of that area. So basically, the Fianna, the Irish Boy Scouts, it was set up in 1909. Co-founded by Countess Markievicz and Bulmer Hobson in response to Baden-Powell's Boy Scouts. So, you know, boys would join the Boy Scouts, and generally they would grow up and then join the British Army. And Countess Markievicz didn't like this, and she decided that there should be an Irish equivalent. So Na Fianna Éireann was set up. So she went to St. Andrew's School. She had a meeting there with the local headmaster to see if any of the boys from the local area would be interested in joining Na Fianna. And as I said, some of the earliest members of Na Fianna were lads from the Pearse Street, Ringsend area. And here we have St. Andrew's School, and here we have Leo Fitzgerald. And what you find with Na Fianna is that by the time the Irish Volunteers were founded in 1913, these boys were grown up, and they then became the officers of the Irish Volunteers. So they had a lot of experience. They were 4 years ahead of the game. And then, of course, in this photograph here, we have Countess Markievicz just right in the centre, surrounded by our boys in Na Fianna. And this was a movement that was so close to Countess's heart. Even when she died, her funeral, the first who marched behind the cortege, the actual hearse, are the boys of Na Fianna. But you didn't just have Na Fianna in the Ringsend area. There was another boys organisation, and we have a couple of accounts of it from some of the witness statements from some of those who were in this organisation and later members of the IRA. So here we have Sean O'Shea. And this organisation was called Fianna Pádraig, and it's a completely different organisation. And basically what Sean O'Shea is saying is that he was a member of Fianna Pádraig, a scout unit organised on similar lines to Na Fianna, so similar but separate. The unit was founded by Father Pat Flanagan of Ringsend. We were, if anything, better trained from the military point of view than the Fianna. Now, I think the Fianna members would say something about that, but this is what he's saying. And we met the latter in a scouting exercise in Ticknock in the summer of 1915 and proved to be the better unit on that occasion. But it seems that Fianna Pádraig was only to the Ringsend area. They don't expand. And then we have Richard Balfe, and he's a member of D Company of the 3rd Battalion of the IRA. And D Company was in Ringsend. And basically, some of you probably know these names. He says in 1911, along with Mick Malone, Jim Grace and others, I was a member of Merlaka Oga Club. This is a revolutionary club in Ringsend. We were attached to Gaelic League there in Naomh Pádraig. And afterwards, when the Fianna were established there under Father Flanagan, Father Costello and Colin O'Loughlin, I joined them. So there we have two members of Na Fianna Pádraig, as well as Fianna Éireann members. So right from the start, you have this activism amongst the young, very young people in the area. So then jumping forward, 1913, the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizen Army are set up in and around the same time in November. So in 1912, you have the introduction of Home Rule. Well, Home Rule is put in the statute books. In response to this threat of Home Rule being introduced, you have the Ulster Volunteer Force being set up in Ulster, basically promising to take up arms against the British government if they try to introduce Home Rule, this level of self-government. but no one was there to protect Home Rule. So it's decided there should be a body set up, and the Irish Volunteers were set up in the south of the country and in basically all over the country. And it's a nationwide organisation, and there's thousands of members. But then the Irish Citizen Army was unique, very different in a couple of ways, in that women were members. And also they had their own Boy Scout section of the Irish Citizen Army, but that was born out of the 1913 lockout. But these two organisations formed around the same time, and it's those two organisations, along with the Fianna and then along with Cumann and Mon, who are set up in 1914, who then take part in the Easter Rising. But when we come to the Easter Rising, just to give you the breakdown of the way the volunteers were set up, different to the Irish Citizen Army in that it's one large body. That's pretty much it. But the Irish Volunteers, they were set up on a brigade basis. So a Dublin Brigade, Cork Brigade, Carlow Brigade, Galway Brigade. But a brigade was made up of battalions. And there were 5 battalions in Dublin. So you had the 1st and 2nd operated on the north side of the city, and then the 3rd and 4th operated on the south side of the city, and the 3rd is our area, Ringsend, Pearse Street, and so on. The 5th was the Fingal Battalion. Now later on, when the volunteers reorganised, become known as the IRA, the 5th Battalion becomes the Engineers. So they're their own unique battalion within the Dublin Brigade, and they're made up of men from all of the different city battalions. So here is the 3rd Brigade operational area in 1916 right through to the War of Independence. So in 1916, the battalions, so the 3rd Battalion, all of the battalions were made up of companies, and in 1916 there were 6 companies in the 3rd Battalion area, so A, B, C, D, E and F, and that was out in Dunleary. You have approximately 400 members. That changed by the time of the War of Independence. By 1919, it extended to 13 companies. So you've got 8 in the city, and then 5 in the South County, south of Dublin. And they later become their own battalion just before the War of Independence ends. So I want to show you in this map. We know that Dublin was a garrison city. It was literally a ring of steel, or it had a ring of steel around. There's military barracks all around it. And just to point out a couple of them in the 3rd Battalion area, this is what they were contending with. So you have Dublin Castle up at just off Dame Street there, and in that you had the military brawl, so you had the police, then you have of course the DMP station in Great Brunswick Street, what is now Pearse Street, and then very close is Beggars Bush Barracks, but then Portobello Barracks is only up the road. So there's a lot of Crown Forces, police in the area. And as I said, Dublin ring of steel around it. But then we look at the breakdown of the companies, and they gave specifically their areas of operation. So here we have a company, and they extended from Redmond's Hill, Angel Street down to Parliament Street, particularly around Camden Street, Wexford Street, Redmond's Hill. That area became known as the Dardanelles because it was so active. And we know the Dardanelles comes from one of the battles in the First World War. But the IRA were so active in that particular area that it was given the nickname the Dardanelles, because they were ambushing the military in the War of Independence at every opportunity they got. B Company, they were Dawson Street to Delir Street, back to Pearse Street, and then including Baggot Street to Canal to the Liffey and O'Connell Bridge. C Company, they operated in and around South Richmond Street, Harcourt Road, Harcourt Street, Grafton Street. These are all the streets that we know and we walk pretty much every day. D Company, so this is relevant to Ringsend, and their specific area of operations was Ringsend, Sandymount, stretching out to Merrion Road. And as you can see from this map here on my right, it's just that little note at the end. It says companies had areas of operations, but were not confined to the area. So what you would find, starting in the War of Independence, if say a company were carrying out an operation but needed help, then they might call on us from B Company or D Company or E Company, and then they would work together. But you can see from this map on the right, it's basically just just a ring, that's the whole operational area of the 3rd Battalion. And we know specifically that D Company is Ringsend, Sandymount to Merrion Road. And again, just to show you there, we have the area of operation. So quite a big area of operation, as we find with all of the battalions. And where was the headquarters of the 3rd Battalion? Well, very close. It was at number 144 Pearse Street. Now, you've just right beside the library, it's actually part of Pearse Street Library today, and the plaque, you've probably walked past the plaque 1,000 times, and that is a plaque commemorating the 3rd Battalion. So it was a religious hall, but was used by the volunteers, and not only was it the headquarters of the battalion, it was also the headquarters of B Company of the Irish Volunteers. Now, just leading up to 1916, and look, we have the big names. We all know the big names in the Irish Revolution, and in Dublin there were some big names, but there's some big names in the 3rd Battalion. And just to point out a few of them, so we have the O'Reilly. He was captain of B Company, and he's the one that was killed leading out that small group of men from the GPO, the Born and GPO, on the Friday to try to make their way to Moore Street, and they're all pretty much shot down. But he is a member of the 3rd Battalion, B Company. Eamon de Valera, one of the biggest names, he was captain of E Company. And by the time of 1916, he had been promoted to the commandant. So he is the man in overall charge of the 3rd Battalion by the time we come to the Easter Rising. Now, he was succeeded as commandant by this man, the next man to my right, Joseph O'Connor. He leaves a great witness statement, loads of details of the activities he got involved in. But he was A Company, 3rd Battalion, and then he was later promoted to the commandant, so the overall commander of the 3rd Battalion. And then another big name is this man, Sean McMahon, and he was B Company of the 3rd Battalion. He later became the commanding officer of B Company, and then in the War of Independence he becomes he's a member of the IRA General Headquarters staff. He becomes the Quartermaster General during the Civil War. And this bridge that, again, you've probably walked over 1,000 times, is named McMahon Bridge, renamed. It was the 4th bridge to be put there, and it was opened by Eamon de Valera, so who would have been in 1916, like Sean McMahon served under De Valera in Boland's in 1916, and he's the one that opens the bridge named after Sean McMahon. So there we have it, and Boland's, it's a perfect location, you know, it's where he fought in the Rising. So there's just some of the big names, and there's a lot of big names in the 3rd Battalion. And then when it comes to 1916, you have the most successful engagement by the Irish Volunteers happened in the 3rd Battalion area, and it's the Battle of Mount Street Bridge, where now this photograph, so we're looking from Clanwilliam House, which is long gone now, but we're looking up Northumberland Road, and we have the schoolhouse, which is still there, just on the left. And it was here that you had 17 volunteers of the 3rd Battalion, mainly C Company, under the command of Michael Malone, and we have George Reynolds, you also have James Grace, there's the Walsh brothers, 17 of them. That was all. And in that battle that lasted about 10 hours on the 26th of April 1916, they inflicted very severe casualties. In all, 234 British soldiers were killed and wounded trying to cross that little bridge there, just so they could make their way in towards GPO to attack the headquarters position. And you have then the memorial on the bridge to those who died, to those volunteers who died, Michael Malone being one of them. He was only 25 years old at the time, and George Reynolds. And of course, Reynolds House and a number of the flat complexes in and around the Ringsend area are named after those that we've just talked about, who died in 1916 and beyond. So 1916, right, 3rd Battalion, it's well and truly established. They were the last battalion to also surrender, when the surrender did come. Eamon de Valera was sentenced to death, but of course he wasn't executed, not because he was an American, but because they were delayed in getting to Richmond Barracks. So by the time Eamon de Valera and the 3rd Battalion are brought to Richmond Barracks, the executions had taken place. Public opinion began to change, so they began to be more selective as to who they were going to execute. Didn't think Eamon de Valera would be, was too important. Thomas Ashe was another one who was sentenced to death, and that was one of the many mistakes that the British made after 1916, underestimating who they kept in custody or didn't execute or did execute. So after 1916, the volunteers' leadership was wiped out. They had to reorganise, and this is what you have in this 2-year period between 2.5-year period between the end of 1916 and then the beginning of the War of Independence in 1919. And very, very quickly, what happened in those couple of years? So you have Joseph O'Connor. So he's appointed or elected as the commandant of the 3rd Battalion, replacing Eamon de Valera. We know that the number of the battalions or companies in the battalion increased, so 6 in 1916, and by the time of the War of Independence, we have 13. They needed arms. It's a volunteer army. They haven't got a ready supply of weapons. So they were raiding police barracks, they were raiding private houses for arms, so building up the cache of arms for when the fight would come. Sinn Féin, the political party, which had been a moderate nationalist party, becomes the Republican Party, thanks to the media and the British government, by mistakenly calling the 1916 rising a Sinn Féin rebellion, which it wasn't. But Sinn Féin, as the political party, begins to rise. Eamon de Valera and so on stand in elections, and by the time of the 1918 general election, Sinn Féin win the election and become the main political party in the country. Another couple of things that happened in 1918, the conscription crisis, where Britain threatened to introduce conscription to Ireland. This brought a lot of people into the ranks of the volunteers. A lot of support was received for Sinn Féin. Another thing that drove more people to support Sinn Féin was the German plot arrest, where the government completely fabricated this German plot, where they said that the Republicans were plotting with the Germans again for another rebellion. So in order to stop this, they'd arrest all the leaders. So you've got Eamon de Valera and so on being arrested. No such thing. But again, this plays into actually the hands of Sinn Féin. It gets them more support. Again, Sinn Féin win the 1918 general election. And one of the things that they had said in the campaign was that if they were elected, the representatives, those elected, would not take their seats in Westminster. They wouldn't attend the parliament there. They would actually sit in an Irish parliament in Ireland. And they do that on the 21st of January 1919, the first meeting of Dáil Éireann. Now, the majority of those who were elected were actually in prison because of those arrests in 1918. But it's a very historic, symbolic day. And by pure coincidence, on that very same day, you have down in Tipperary, members of the 3rd Battalion of the Tipperary Brigade of the IRA ambush 2 policemen who were escorting the consignment of gelignite to a quarry. Again, they need weapons, they need explosives. They shoot the 2 policemen, it's Stanbury and Sean Tracy, Seamus Robinson, and so on. And this is seen, these 2 events is officially seen as the beginning of the War of Independence. But those 2 events, they happen by pure coincidence. It's just a matter of timing. So we're into the War of Independence. And what happens? So basically, the first year, certainly in Dublin, it's dominated by assassinations. Around the country, you've got the IRA, as they're now known, raiding for arms. They're attacking the RIC, who are the local police force, dotted all over the country. In Dublin, you do have the RIC on the outskirts, what is now, like, Dublin City was so small back then. It was literally the canals was the boundary of the city. So Crumlin and so on would have RIC policemen there, but in the city you had the DMP, the Dublin Metropolitan Police, and they were the ones that had identified the leadership in 1916, and that led then to those being executed and so on. And they really were the eyes and ears of the British government in Ireland. Now there's G Division, And G Division was the political division. So it's those police officers that are the ones that are following the members of Sinn Féin. They know who's who in the Republican area or Republican movement. And basically, Michael Collins in top left. So he basically becomes the director of intelligence within the IRA and is given permission to set up an intelligence department and also an assassination squad, because he was told by members of G Division, so policemen who were friendly to the Republicans, including Ned Bry and David Nelligan's another one, that basically you're going to have to fight fire with fire. The British are known for their intelligence, you're going to have to do the same. So basically, they assassinated or began an assassination war against the G-men. Now, they were warned off. Those who heeded the warnings weren't touched, but those who didn't, then they were assassinated. Now, the thing was, G Division was originally in Dublin Castle, and in 1915 it moved down to what's now Pearse Street Police Station. So again, you walk past it day in, day out. So here we have some intelligence officers and some members of the squad. So basically the squad are the 12 apostles, because initially there were 12 members of this group. You had intelligence officers, and one of them is seen here, Charlie Dalton. So they would be gathering intelligence. Information was coming in left, right and centre. 2 offices that they had in Crow Street, or right under the nose of Dublin Castle. And if word was then given that a policeman had to be assassinated, then it would be the likes of Joe Leonard, Paddy O'Daly, we've got William Stapleton, Jimmy Slattery and so on, Vinnie Bourne, that would then carry out those assassinations. And you have the intelligence officers such as Dalton, they would accompany those men on this job, identify the policeman or whoever the target was, and then the squad would shoot them. And this photograph here, now there's a whole photo album in military archives full of these photographs, and they're quite sinister, because this is the type of information they were gathering. And this is a photograph of G-men, so members of the political division of the DMP, and you can see their numbers and they've got their names. But here, number 7, there's no name for him, and you can see it there beside him, it's dead. Now, we don't know if he died as a result of being assassinated by the IRA, by the squad, or he died of other causes. But there's a photo album, it's the Finton Murphy, I think, collection of military archives, and it's just full of these photographs. So the forced assassinations, one of the forced assassinations that happened was in Pearse Street, and it was of this man, Detective Constable Daniel HOEY. Now, the first one was the dog Smith, who was shot outside pretty much his front door by the squad at the end of July, early August 1919, followed soon after by the shooting of HOEY. Now, you can see this is the back of Pearse Street Police Station on Townsend Street, and again, you probably know the doorway, you've walked past it. And it was brazen enough that the dog Smith was shot outside his home, but HOEY was actually shot right outside the police station. He was going into Pearse Street Police Station when the squad descended and shot him. Now, the thing was, he was really vigorous in trying to arrest the IRA, and he knew who was who. And he had actually been involved in a raid the previous night on Harcourt Street. So he's really a target of the squad, and he was shot, as I said, right as he's getting into Pearse Street Police Station. And that's what dominates 1919. It's ambushed around the country. The RIC are getting shot. In Dublin, it's mainly the political police, and then there's raids, farms, and the British were caught off guard. But then once they sort of gathered their thoughts and really realised what's happening, they began to reorganise. And when we come into 1920, the IRA do have the upper hand to begin with, but then with the creation of 2 forces, things begin to get an awful lot worse. And these 2 forces were the Black and Tans, followed by the auxiliaries. Now, just to distinguish between the 2, so with the RIC, with the attacks, so many attacks on the RIC, with their barracks being burnt all across the country, it was very hard to get men to join the RIC. Also, men were resigning, so they couldn't get recruits, and it was decided by Winston Churchill to raise a new force. So the Black and Tans, as we call them, they were raised. Now, that's not their official name. So they were policemen, right? They were a permanent force. They are sent here to basically reinforce the RIC, and they were going to be here as long as the British government were, or the British were in Ireland. You get the nickname the Black and Tans because there was a shortage of uniforms, so they're mixed and matched, and the Irish put the nickname on them, the Black and Tans. But they're sent all across the country. There's thousands upon thousands of them, and the men who served in that there was some Irishmen, Englishmen, Scottishmen, but they'd all fought in the First World War. They were all ex-British Army. Now, the auxiliaries, they arrive around July 1920. Now, different in a couple of ways, because one, they were a temporary force. So they were only going to exist as long as this conflict, this action existed. Now, this was not a war in the eyes of the British. So they're a temporary full-time force. Their numbers pale in comparison to the Black and Tans, but these men, the men who make up the auxiliaries, they were all officers who had served in the British Army. Some had been involved in intelligence and so on, but pretty much independent, could do what they wanted. And those smaller forces, they were ruthless, and literally wherever these groups went, they left a trail of devastation behind them. But just to point out to you, in relation to the 3rd Battalion area, so how many auxiliary companies you had that the 3rd Battalion had to contend with. You've got them in Burgers Bush. That was their headquarters, Burgers Bush Barracks. There were also F, Z and S Company. They were in Dublin Castle, and F Company were notorious. Q Company, they arrive in March 1921. They're based on the North Wall, the docks there, and then you have R Company as well. So there's a big concentration in and around the 3rd Battalion area. And with the reorganisation, or with the raising of those two forces, and also British intelligence had been really taken by surprise. Like the G Division was basically null and void. It wasn't a threat to the IRA anymore. So the British had to reorganise, and what they did was they brought over men from England. Now, it was hard to identify who these men were because they weren't operating in the police stations. They weren't wearing police uniforms. These men were here as businessmen. They lived in the city, in hotels, in boarding houses and so on. And the auxiliaries, the RIC, Black and Tans, and the British intelligence officers began to have success against the IRA. And it gets to the point in October that the IRA suffered some heavy losses. You've got Kevin Barry being executed in November. Lord Mayor Cork, Terence Sweeney, had died on hunger strike. Sean Tracy had been shot in Talbot Street. And Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister, makes a speech on the 9th November. He is so confident that they are getting the upper hand that he basically says, we have murder by the throat. A couple of Collins's key men had been picked up by British intelligence. They didn't know who they had in their midst. And Collins realises it's us or them. Someone's going to strike first. He decided it was going to be him. And that leads to the events that we now know as Bloody Sunday, 24th November 1920, where Collins sends out his men, his assassins, supported by, in all, there was about 161 people involved in the operation that morning to assassinate British Secret Service men. And where the majority of the assassinations take place is in the 3rd Battalion area. These intelligence officers were in and around the 3rd Battalion area. It's Baggot Street, it's Pembroke Street, it's all over the place. So, of course, you have a lot of the 3rd Battalion being involved in this operation. And just to give some of the addresses, now you have in all, there was 14 were killed. Not all were intelligence officers, but just to go through some of them. So at 119 Lower Baggot Street, members of B Company, they go there, and that's where you have Captain Begali killed. You have at 92 Lower Baggot Street, again, B Company, there you have Captain Newbury killed. Then you have Upper Pembroke Street, number 28, and most of these addresses are still there. The premises are still there, and Pembroke Street was the worst, because that was believed to be the headquarters of British intelligence. You had a large number of intelligence officers there, and this is where you have C Company members, including Paddy Flanagan, You also have Charlie Dalton, who's one of the intelligence officers. He's there. And at that address, you have Captain Price, Major Dowling, and Colonel Montgomery are killed. Wounded, you've got Colonel Woodcock and Lieutenant Murray and Captain Keeney side. And just a side note, the libraries should have a copy of the book. Colonel Woodcock's wife, she actually wrote an account of what happened there. She witnessed what happened in Pembroke Street, and it's called An Officer's Wife in Ireland. Get it if you haven't read it. It's a brilliant, brilliant book. Then we have Northumberland Road, 16 Northumberland Road, members of D Company. So men from Ringsend, they were involved there, and it's at that address that you have the auxiliary cadets, Frank Garnis and Cecil Augustus Morris, that were killed there. So you can see Bloody Sunday, although you have members of the squad, you know, being mainly involved in this operation, the addresses that are hit, the majority of them are in the 3rd Battalion area, and it's an awful lot of men from the 3rd Battalion that take part. So this was a huge, huge blow to the British. Now, it didn't destroy British intelligence. It did undermine them. It shook them. But they did begin to reorganise. Now, the auxiliaries, they were pretty much, they believed that they were untouchable. A week after Bloody Sunday, you have the ambush at Kilmichael, where the 3rd West Cork Brigade flying column wipe out a platoon of auxiliaries. The first attack on auxiliaries in Dublin was carried out by the 3rd Battalion, members of A Company 3rd Battalion, and it was when they were raiding the post office out in Ballsbridge for the mails, because another way to get intelligence was to seize the post, to seize the mail, because there could be letters from informers, which there were an awful lot of letters from informers, but they would go through the mail and so on. And here we have a newspaper account of it. It happened on the 14th of December 1920. And here is bombs and bullets, brisk engagement, no casualties reported. An amazing incident took place at Ballsbridge Post Office yesterday morning when a mailbag was reported to have been seized from auxiliary police by armed men, who then made their escape in the motor car which had conveyed the escort to the scene. So the first attack on auxiliaries carried out by members of the 3rd Battalion. Now, the thing was that the offices that Collins had as his intelligence officers, they were in Crow Street initially. There was a couple around the city, but the main office was Crow Street, just really close to Dublin Castle. But there was a lot of pressure getting put on after Bloody Sunday, so they had to move. And where they moved offices to, where they moved their headquarters to, was the offices over the Palace Cinema, what's now the Academy. So there you have the intelligence war continuing, because they just moved offices and the information was coming in on a regular basis from everywhere, from police, from people who worked in the post offices, from maids, coming on. There was the information, and that's the headquarters in Pearse Street. Now, at the end of 1920, the active service unit is set up. So you've probably heard of the flying columns with the country unit. So basically, guys who could not, it was too dangerous for them to go home, they had to go on the run. So you have these mobile units being set up, what become known as the flying columns. So they're full-time units, take the fight to the enemy at any opportunity. Dublin hadn't got that. And the thing is, we have to remember that this was a volunteer army. So you'll notice that probably a lot of ambushes take place at weird times, either first thing in the morning or middle of the day, because you would have volunteers either in work. There's an ambush called at lunchtime. Go, take part in it, go back to work, or go and take part in it before you begin work. But it was decided that there was a full-time unit needed in Dublin. So at the end of 1920, the active service unit is set up, and its commanding officer is a 3rd Battalion man, Paddy Flanagan. I've mentioned him already. He was involved in Bloody Sunday, and it was made up of 50 IRA men. So men from the 4 units, from the 4 city battalions, made up the active service unit. And basically you had about 13 men from each unit, and they operated along the same lines as the battalion. So you've got number 1 and 2 sections of the active service unit operating on the north side, as their battalions did. Number 3 and 4 section, they operate on the south side, and again to their battalion areas. And they were under the direct control of general headquarters of the IRA. The idea being that the IRA GHQ would tell the active service unit, you go and attack this. You gather all this information, spend days gathering information, and then tell us you want to attack. We'll decide on whether you should attack and then give you the go ahead. Now, that didn't last very long, because I think it was a company trying to do this. They're waiting around for days, and the whole company or the whole section nearly got picked up, and they just went, ain't going to do this. If we see an opportunity to ambush, we're going to do it. We'll report to you later. So basically, they will harass the enemy. And just to show you, we've got some members of the number 3 section. And here you've got them, Christy Cruz, Patrick Wall, Joseph Kelly, and they're all taken from the different companies. So you've got members of A company, B company, C company, D company, and so on. But it's commanding officer, a 3rd Battalion man, Paddy O'Flanagan. And here we've got some of the members from the 3rd Battalion who were members of the active service unit, including James Doyle, Michael White, and George White. This photograph dates from 1939, when they had one of their reunions. Now, the thing with the War of Independence is it goes in waves. So the IRA have successes, and then the Crown Forces, the British, hit back. They have successes. Looks like the IRA are on their knees. And then the IRA hit back. That's what you have with 1920, with Bloody Sunday, with Kilmichael and so on. But January 1921 opens with the IRA suffering a lot of defeats, a lot of executions, a lot of arrests. But then they do hit back. But now a big loss that has suffered to the Dublin Brigade is the executions that take place on the 14th of March 1921, where you've got 6 IRA men hanged in Mountjoy jail. So they're part of that group called the Forgotten 10, who are buried in Mountjoy jail, and their bodies were reinterred there, 14, 15 years ago. But the men that were executed were from the 2nd Battalion. You've got one from the 3rd Battalion, and then the 4 were from the 4th Battalion, including Frank Flood, Patrick Doyle. We've got Bernard Ryan, Thomas Bryan, and the reason they're executed is because they took part in an ambush at Drumcondra Bridge and they were arrested. And then we have Patrick Moran, and we have Thomas Whelan, seeing this photograph on the left, and they were both charged with having been involved in the events on Bloody Sunday. Patrick Moran was 2nd Battalion, and then Thomas Whelan, although he wasn't from Dublin, he was a member of E Company, 3rd Battalion, and he lived in Barrow Street. And he was charged with killing Captain Begali on Bloody Sunday. Moran was charged with the shootings at Mount Street. So they're hanged roughly half an hour apart in twos on the morning of the 14th of March 1921. It's a huge blow. But the IRA responded, as in the IRA were told to get revenge that night for these executions. And what happens is the Battle of Great Brunswick Street, or the Great Brunswick Street ambush on the evening of the 14th of March 1921. And here we have some newspapers are full of reports of what happened. And you can see it there: auxiliary police attacked, bloody affair in Dublin. This is actually the most violent day in Dublin after Bloody Sunday, because of the numbers that were killed and certainly wounded. And you have there 3 men killed, 3 wounded, 5 cadets injured, arms and bombs seized. And here we have a photograph at the scene that's there at 144 St Andrew's Club, where the headquarters of the 3rd Battalion were. But what had happened was, right, so the IRA, word was sent out, basically, is there to just get revenge for what happened. And what they did was that you had the curfew at 9 o'clock. So curfew introduced at 9 p.m. The only people that were going to be out in the streets were the military, and anyone who was on the streets after that time could be liable for arrest, or sometimes worse. You've a volunteer called Sean Dolan, who goes up to Pearse Street Police Station and he throws a grenade. And this is basically to draw out the auxiliaries. But the thing was that the grenade bounced back and Dolan got severely wounded. He ends up losing the leg. Now, word obviously was sent to Dublin Castle, and F Company of the Auxies, they rush out, but they don't go to Pearse Street Police Station. They go straight for number 144. So you would think they go to Pearse Street, where this attack had happened, but they knew where to go, because word had been sent to them before this that there was a gang of lads, there was a gang of men all around 144. So they knew exactly where to go, and that's where they make for. But what they didn't realise is that waiting for them were members of the IRA. As many as 34 volunteers were waiting for them. And literally from the junction, just here at Sandwich Street, right down, you've got the volunteers lined up. And as soon as the auxiliaries come down, they open fire on them. Now, the battle only lasted a couple of minutes, but in that time, you do have a number of people being killed and wounded, including 2 auxiliaries are killed, section leader Joseph Beard and temporary cadet Francis, I sorry, I have to get his name there because my thing is in the way. Sorry, my screen is in the way. Francis Farrell. You then have 2 IRA that were also killed, and Leo Fitzgerald. So the one we met at the very start of this presentation, who joined the Fianna way back in 1909, he's killed in this battle. Bernard O'Hanlon, another volunteer that was killed. 4 civilians were killed. Thomas Asquith, David Kelly, Stephen Clark, and a woman, Mary Frances Morgan, and 6 more are wounded. Now, the aftermath of this is that 2 men are sentenced to death. One is executed, one is reprieved. So Thomas Traynor, he's a member of B Company, as was Leo Fitzgerald. He was sentenced and he was executed on the 25th of April 1921. And then John Donnelly, again B Company, although sentenced to death, his sentence was commuted. So this is the event known as the Battle of Great Brunswick Street. Now, it continues. It keeps going, because then we have the arrival of Q Company of the auxiliaries, and they're based in the LNWR hotel across the Liffey. And they were a specifically trained force, because it was made up of naval officers, because a lot of arms were coming in, being smuggled in by the IRA through the ships. So these men would know if there was a secret door, a hiding place, and so on. And also they were to keep watch out for fellas trying to get out of the country or people that might be coming in. So you have this unit being set up and being successful against the IRA, and then it was decided to combat this, that the IRA would set up their own Q Company, and it's Sean McMahon that gives the go-ahead to set up Q Company, and it's the IRA equivalent. And basically you have John Archie Kennedy, and thanks to Jerry Shannon for giving me his grandfather's or great-grandfather's information. He is the one that's responsible. He's the commanding officer of Q Company. And what he says is that about this time, so about March, April 1921, I was called to headquarters, old IRA, to organise men in ships and about the quays for gun running. This I did to the great satisfaction of General Michael Collins, the late Chief of Staff, Sean McMahon. I think it was around April 1921. I personally recruited and initiated over 50 men, which was called Q Company, and they were quite successful in their operations. But you can see there what happens on one side, the other side will mimic, and there we have a very own Q Company. And just to show you just how active the 3rd Battalion were. Just look at the examples of the attacks they were involved in. Some successful, some weren't successful. But look, B Company, ambush in Great Brunswick Street, Custom House destroyed, another one in Western Road, Pierce Street, ambushes all over the city. K Company, they're involved in the burning of the Custom House. An armoured car attacked on Merrion Square. They're involved in bombing military lorries in Mount Street. And look at D Company, you have it there, King's Inn raided for arms. Again, King's Inn raided, and you got arms and machine guns, shooting the British spies. That's November, bloody Sunday. Military bombed in Grand Canal Street, ambush at Grand Canal Bridge. Again, they're involved in the Custom House. Tans bombed in Ringsend, wounding men in Sandymount. Big ambush in Ringsend, and then the general up on the 10th of July. Just to go back to this 8th of June operation, the big ambush in Ringsend. So what happened there? So here we have it. The newspaper accounts describe what happened, and just to read it out to you here, and this is from the Nina Garden newspaper. It says, shortly before 12:30 on Wednesday, exciting scenes occurred in Great Brunswick Street. Lorries containing Crown forces were proceeding in the direction of Ringsend when they were attacked in the neighbourhood of Tara Street. Those in the lorries are stated to have sustained some casualties. A man who was in Great Brunswick Street at the time told the press rep that lorries containing RIC auxiliaries were attacked. A number of shots were fired at them, and the Crown forces immediately dismounted and fired up and down Brunswick Street into Tara Street. People who were about ran in all directions, taking shelter wherever possible. I had my right knee grazed by a bullet which tore the cloth, he said. Another man who was in the vicinity stated that about 12:25, 2 revolver shots rang out, and that after a pause of about a minute, there were 2 bomb explosions close together, and this continues. Several further shots and explosions followed, all in the Great Brunswick Street area. Afterwards, there was the Zulta revolver firing around Eden Quay, a neighbourhood of the Custom House, Delir Street, O'Connell Bridge, O'Connell Street. And a later account states that the Crown forces were fired on from various points along Great Brunswick Street, and some of them were struck. The wounded were removed to King George V Hospital in Corporation Ambulance. Great activity on the part of the Crown forces followed in Great Brunswick Street. So from this account, you have it that the IRA attack this force of auxiliaries that are making their way towards Ringsend, and the auxiliaries put up a good fight. A number of them are wounded. That's the official version. Then you have the IRA's version, which is a little bit different. And we have it here by Joseph O'Connor, who recalled, and I'm going to read it out to you. So basically, from the IRA's perspective, it was noticed that a party was frequently at the Tara Walks in Ringsend. They were usually black and tans. They always used the generic term black and tans, but they're talking about the Auxies, and apparently came from Gormanstown to get road making material. It was decided to attack them, and Lieutenant Sean McBride was put in charge of the operation. A rallying fight was made by the Tans, so that matches the newspapers. Our men being posted at various junction roads to that on which they were travelling, and as they passed from one party, they found themselves up against the same trouble with the next. The last of our parties was at Shaw Street. The Tans drove on. Some of the barrels of tar had been ignited, and quite a number of the men were wounded. They stopped in front or in Pierce Street opposite the fire brigade station and proceeded to dump the wounded men on the roadway, having notified the ambulance to take them to hospital, not knowing that quite possibly the hospital or the ambulance driver was a member of the Irish Citizen Army or the IRA. During this time, some of the unwounded men were on the road in Tara Street looking towards Buck Bridge. Now, where the newspaper report says there's a lot of firing going on, it wasn't necessarily just coming from the IRA, because as Joseph O'Connor continues, the ordinary military patrol. So you've got the Auxies being attacked, but then the ordinary, the British soldiers, the military, they're on a patrol, and they happen to be passing across Buck Bridge at the time to take up its customary round of the south side when someone fired, and quite a battle was fought in broad daylight between the British military in the lorry and the black and tan on the street. So the auxiliaries were fighting not just the IRA, but they were also fighting their comrades in the British Army as well. Now, we're just about coming to the end. The IRA, the 3rd Battalion, all of the IRA, they were active right up until the very end, because on the 12th of July, 1921, it's over. The truce is declared. 12 noon on the 11th of July, the ceasefire will come into effect and the war is over. And you can see this, the 10th of July 1921, what this was, the general operation in Dublin against all British. This was the shooting up that was planned in O'Connell Street, where the IRA were going to basically isolate O'Connell Street and shoot everyone that was in it, military, their girlfriends, after curfew. It wasn't, or it didn't happen because the truce was coming into effect. So the last major operation was carried out by the 4th Battalion with the Ballyfermot troop train ambush, but they were planning that big operation. But it's not the end of the story. Although the war has ended, and you can see this photograph sums it all up, the way the whole country must have felt, certainly the civilian population. It's just an amazing photograph. Kids out in the streets celebrating, you know, did they know what was being celebrated? I don't know, but they're waving the flags, but look, they're in their bare feet, the poor little things. But it was over. There was a hope of peace, and this had never happened before, that, you know, a small country had brought, you know, the biggest empire the world had ever seen They forced them to the negotiating table. They didn't ask for the truce. The British government did, with no conditions. So 11th of July, it's all over. And it can be said easily, or most likely, the last person to die as a result of actions that happened in the War of Independence was a girl from Ringsend. And a huge thank you to KEOGH O'Rourke for discovering the story, and the locals of Ringsend for bringing this story to light. So I've asked Pádraig, can I show this? And he said, yeah. But a huge thank you for him for discovering this. And it was Margaret KEOGH, a member of Cumann na mBan, who was from Stella Gardens. And it has been said, if any one person sort of embodied the Republican spirit and what it was to be a Republican activist, it was Margaret. Like, at 19 years of age, look at what she was doing. She was a member of the Renala branch of Cumann na mBan. She was involved in the Pro Ladies Hurling Club. She was an organiser of the Irish Clerical Workers Union. She's a member of Conra Gaeilge. You know, she's a fluent Gaelic speaker. In fact, that's one of the reasons she gets arrested in 1920, because she wouldn't give her name in English to the police, so she's arrested. She worked as well. She was a draper's assistant. And the thing was that the truce had been announced on the 8th of July, and you have that sort of grace period to get the word out that on the 11th it'll stop at 12 noon. And in some cases you do have sort of last actions, and there were raids being carried out by the Crown forces. And Margaret's home was used as an arms dump, and she was fearful that if the military did come, that they would discover the arms, the ammunition and so on. So she was moving the ammunition. Now, the story that had been put out was that she was shot at her front door by, you know, a murder gang, like, you know, a British murder gang. But the family and Pádraig have told what actually happened to Margaret, and that she's transferring the weapons and the ammunition, and unfortunately one of the bullets fell into the fire and exploded, and it went in, it injured Margaret, and unfortunately she died from her wounds a day after the truce came into effect. But what we have with Margaret is that she is the only member of Cumann na mBan to have died within the actual time frame of the official time frame of the War of Independence, 1919 to 1921, and tragically dies a day after that conflict ends. But absolutely amazing to see. And again, thanks so much to the people of Ringsend, to Dublin City Council and to Pádraig, all working together this year to mark the centenary of Margaret's death. A plaque was unveiled at the bridge there, which you can all see. So on that note, it's not a nice note to end on, but I do hope that with this talk, it has just showed you that how a community has a story to tell. We all have stories to tell. We're all connected to the revolution, but also the 3rd Battalion was a very, very, very important battalion. A lot went on, and I was scratching the surface with this talk. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd just again like to say thanks a million to Sarah and Kate for looking after everything, and thank you to you for tuning in today. Thanks very much.